I will just start with a general talk about my practice and I guess my ideologies, and then I'll go over some projects, and then I'll leave like 20 minutes at the end, and we can talk about anything, either like concepts or we can go deeper into any of the projects that I mentioned. Just depends on what anyone is interested in. And if anyone has comments or thoughts and wants to stop me or whatever, just feel free to leave it in the chat. Um, yeah. Hello. Thank you again for having me. So I'm Chia. I'm an internet artist. I guess that's what you call it. And I've been making websites for as long as I can remember. I'm currently calling in from the Bay Area. I work a day job as a product designer working in creative tooling, um, but have always been extremely online. And I guess to like summarize what I do, I make a lot of games, tools, archives, personal sites, and writing about the internet and website making in general. And I've been making websites for as long as I can remember. I grew up in the Philippines and I was basically very repressed as a child and I did not have like many avenues to like go out and express myself or even interact with many people. So I just found the internet had unrestricted access to it, which is very dangerous. And they eventually kind of became my source of, I guess, like agency and maybe even liberation. It was through websites, particularly through fan sites and just like early internet communities where I taught myself how to code and design and basically learn how to present myself, learn new ways of being, found ways of being with people from all over the world. Um, and my relationship generally with the internet has generally evolved from that, and now thinks about kind of the dangers of that space. But I still generally believe in the possibility of liberation and self-preservation of the internet. Um, Lately, I've been looking at my personal sites a lot and just like trying to digest why my making websites and being on the internet and being online in general was like my primary way of being, my primary way of like uncovering and discovering myself. And I've been drawn to the idea of thinking about infrastructure as identity. I've been thinking about how websites were ways I created space for myself. They were ways that I was able to make myself real, kind of legitimize myself with a place online where I didn't have physical space. It was a way that I kind of like wrote myself into history and authenticated myself and legitimized myself. Oftentimes, when I look at my digital archives, they're kind of the only surviving records I have of my early years. And it's interesting seeing what I chose to collate of myself, what I chose to present then, um, in general, how I've fragmented myself through the internet. Um, so online, I guess I just make a lot of personal websites, and I'm interested in this idea of splitting the self and making myself legible, but also illegible by just scattering myself all over the internet. I literally have this website, which is inexhaustive, that is dedicated to documenting all my personal websites. So I have a bit of a domain hoarding problem. I have a lot of single purpose personal sites, some more well maintained than others, beginning with this kind of personal index of myself. It's my main site. And I just wanted to like kind of list everything that I've done, to as early as I could find. And for those examples of websites as I made as a child, this is probably like the best early example. So a website I made when I was 9 in 2010. Um, I think I made the layout in MS Paint. And as you can see here, I documented Pokemon, Naruto, and website tutorials. And it's kind of illegible because I didn't really care about typography then, I guess. But if you look into this breaking news update, the summary of it is me apologizing for not updating my website because an earthquake hit the Philippines and I did not have power. So that says a lot about my early self, I guess. Um, But yeah, now this way of kind of splitting myself and playing with alternate presentations of the self um, has brought me to kind of think about how creation can be synonymous with liberation. How can I break free from the many of the kind of like repressive and constrained ways that we are expected to like present ourselves online and instead have more control over the structure and the logic and the ways of presenting the self as complex or as split up as we would like for them to be. And when I think about these websites, I think of these sites as places, not just because I've made them and put them up and bought a domain for them, but they're places because making websites themselves was a way of me processing who I am, how I wanted to articulate myself, who I wanted to become. They're places because I chose to inhabit them. I take care of these sites, choose to maintain them, choose to use these sites as records of myself, and eventually kind of mold myself into how I wanted, into the person I wanted to become. Um, and when I think about websites as inhabited places, I think about websites as environments, as places that are felt, as places that are in discussion and conversation with all the internet around. I've been trying to make websites that aren't just like isolated places where you could find me, but websites that are more interdependent and connected with every other site where people tend to gather online and be. Um, in general, I've been thinking about my practice around sites and the poetic web as internet ambient. It's an interest in this environmental nature of the site, specifically in thinking about what we consider as environmental on the internet at all. Um, I've been thinking about where we are, where does the environment on the internet begin? How do we have more agency over it, over how we choose to be online, where we can be, and how we present ourselves? I think about who these websites are serving, who I'm speaking to, and of course, infrastructurally where it's served. Um, I think about what is natural, who is rendered visible, and how site making is an act of rendering ourselves visible. Um, I think about what shapes us, what is natural, how do we have control over our environments, and how we commune with them. And I think about internet ambience as this kind of intense and extreme kind of positioning, not just one that feels cozy or minimalist or underscored. It's this act that is basically a survival mechanism for myself about thinking about what the shape of the internet is today and how I can reshape it to fit myself in there, to fit the people I love in there. How do I position myself there? Um, who shapes it? And what are the intimacies that we usually ignore that we could reclaim? Um, when I think about my intentions with websites, I think first about the internet as a place of gathering. I like to describe my primary goal of being online and of making sites as the ability to gather all the people I love in one place. Which is why I want to make an internet that could be that place. And as someone who's been kind of displaced from home, has been all over, and has the internet as this like one constant that is obviously not very constant, this has been an important condition for me. And in that vein, I've been thinking a lot about exploring intimacy, proximity, care, thinking about the internet as a more domestic place that we can tend and maintain. I've been thinking about the trust I place in the internet, especially when I say all these lofty things about how the internet is a place that liberated me. By default, I wonder how I can shape the internet such that it carries me. This comes in the form of making websites that are directly about love, that function as places where intimacy can become the primary mode of expression, that act as love letters, that act as handmade statements to other people. Um, which statements like this obviously are harder to come by in the web of today. I also think about websites as literally a mode of survival. You can see my interest in personal sites and identity and infrastructure all arise out of this wanting to be seen, this wanting to be recorded. I think making websites for expression is important, but more than that, um, I've been thinking about how the internet is the medium that gives me this privilege of placemaking more than any other areas in the real world. Um, and many of the times, I obviously make websites because I want to be seen, because I want to send out a message that demands to be seen. So there's also this sense of urgency that I feel um, when I am online. Um, what is the website's potential as a place of resistance, as a way of positing an alternative public, as a way of changing the way and means in which we can be together, if a way of making certain things more visible than the others. Um, websites are a matter of making to survive, of working against erasure. And I'm just in general like so much interested in its mode of publishing and distribution that offers us this very real way of gathering together as long as we acknowledge its constraints. Um, and I think my third primary intention with the internet is its ability to create infrastructure, tools, and environments that are essentially so emergent that they can't help but be filled. I don't think any of this website making is a individual act innately by being in a network space. We are communing with other people. And when I think about self-preservation, I think about how it also is inherently an act of communal preservation. By just hand making more sites and presenting ourselves on the internet, by making place for ourselves, we also inevitably make space for others. And making websites that feel like environments and places, I think more about placemaking in the sense of creating the right conditions in which people can gather, in which people can make websites that can eventually be inhabited. When I think about sites, I'm also interested in just this selfish work of density, of abundance, of prolificity that the internet privileges us towards, the internet makes possible. Um, I have this is just like a bunch of pop-ups that present different ideas for sites. It's not lagging my computer. Um, but when I think about sites and all their potentials, I often think about how I don't know, I just want to like take all my ways of being offline and document them and record them online. I trust that meaning follows in a lot of the work I make. Um, I don't think any website is ever finished. I think websites are continuously ways of being and are as sites of emergence, are better understood as, I don't know, invitations of places that must be lived, of places that we can continuously abandon, or that we can maintain, or that we can expand. The act of making a website is more in the care. Um, the care is the work that I put into making it as a place. And I trust that anyone who finds these sites, this abundance of personal sites or community sites, that when they take the effort to look at them, record them, and see me, no matter how chaotically dispersed they are, these nested sites and links are ways that I make myself visible. And thus, I trust in anyone who finds them to get to know me. I trust the internet to carry me, for others to find me, for others to remember me. One of my favorite personal sites that I made um, is If You Knew Me, Would You Love.me, which presents this pop-up when you first enter it, which asks, Do you believe that you could love anyone if you got to know them enough? And I think this kind of encapsulates my thinking around websites a lot. Basically, if you type in no, does not let you enter this site. If you type in maybe, gives you this cheeky long message. And if you type in yes, it lets you enter it. So when I make websites and fragment myself across so many of them, it's kind of done, I guess, kind of like sneakily. They're nested links of links, not immediately legible. I choose to present everything, but not make them easily discoverable or findable. Instead, I trust that anyone who dares to like click in like blog links from 2015, that they're willing to investigate and uncover enough to know that self from back then. And when I look at all these website prompts, when I think about websites as places, I think it's easy to compare them to real world places. That I want to make websites that feel like homes, that feel like gardens, that feel as calm and as tender as libraries and other real world spaces. But I've recently been thinking also about the sickness of the internet. We probably all want to make websites that work against the current web, this web that I allude to as corporate, centralized, surveilled, silent, and even violent. But even if website making is an act of challenging these notions, I think about also the exploitation and the vulnerability of the internet, which is also in itself poetic. Its invasive nature. Um, this is also exhilarating. What does it mean for machines to be explicit and extreme instead of subtle and violating? I guess in general, I want to be conscious of how the internet can also accelerate and mask the flaws of the real world. And when I make places on the internet, I want to make sites that don't just exacerbate the already repressive transgressions and failures of real life spaces, but instead examine how the internet can use their supposed attachment to time, place, and other material limitations to propose new ways of being, ones that better the conditions of the real world. Um, I have a lot of these ideas about websites and their possibilities in this manifesto um, that I wrote in like 2019 and then revisited last year, called this Manifesto for Website Specific Art, that just presents a lot of these suggestions for what a website could be, whether it's a website as a sea, as a material, a website as a fantasy place, as a promise of the internet, as infinite, as an act of reclamation, as something that is alive, a parade, an environment, a mode of facilitating. I'm gonna go over some of the projects and some of the mechanics that I've been using a lot when I make sites. Um, but when I think about the environment of the site and when I think about internet ambience, I think a lot about using the medium of the website to kind of construct it and play with form, subverting it. So I think a lot about this default standards and mechanics of the internet that we often take for granted. And it's in looking at these default conditions of the site, these things that are just like baked into code, um, and working with them to render them more visible or invisible and exploit them. I think this is the thing that motivates me in a lot of my work. This is a piece I made at the beginning of last year, called We Are Only Moving Towards Each Other. I call it a browser concrete poem. When I was making this, I was just thinking about how I hate websites that feel isolated. I hate subtle things. I make on the internet because I no longer want to be seen as quiet or invisible. I want my work to intrude on others' machines. I want people to have to manage my sites. I want my sites to be touched, cared for. I want to take up as much space as I deserve. Um, We're Only Moving to Each Other was one of like my first pieces that really played with a lot of pop-ups. As you can see, it kind of have to be careful and manage them. And because this isn't just a site that is in like one person's browser tab, um, it's interesting because as a concrete poem, you can kind of reorder windows and find maybe countless permutations and ways of reading and looking at it. Um, these experiences are no longer isolated or segregated from a person's way of experiencing their machines and sites, which often aren't isolated at all. Instead, they're forced to contend with it, maintain it. They're it's embedded into your whole desktop. Um, a lot of the sequences in this piece make use with make use of a lot of like hidden or browser attributes that aren't like common ways of reading. You'll find that you'll have to look at the alt text metadata that is often hidden. In this, the title moves. When I hover over certain windows, that's when text is read. There's no one way of reading this piece. It feels generative almost. As hidden elements become the primary modes of reading, tab titles, alt text, metadata, the once invisible become poetic tools. This is another piece I made called The Crucifixion, which is normally this real-time piece that begins at the third hour of the day. It is this kind of poem that is told through document titles and also the user's browser history, which is also often something that people don't really pay attention to. But as you refresh and leave the piece open, tabs are introduced. You have to read through the history to get the story of the piece. And if you leave this piece open and browse normally, interspersed through your history is basically messages sent from the piece, making it almost impossible to parse normally. This is another game I made that makes use of pop-ups. This is interesting in that it has three separate windows talking to each other. And in this piece, Game Chat Shop, it takes place on a decrepit Filipino internet cafe. And I was thinking a lot about, I guess, like the divide between the machine and ourselves, thinking about when we begin and when the machine begins, in essence. This game takes place in a Philippine internet cafe where it's the last day of this MMO. And a lot of my work deals with online identity, about detachment, disembodiment. So in these three windows that the piece prompts up, it's you in the internet cafe where events happen to you that you kind of have to like manage or else the computers lag. There's you in this kind of like fake video game, and there's this chat where everyone's saying goodbye and talking about like the end of the game. And if you read through it, there's like this message and underlying narrative about people trying to reach you and stuff. And essentially, like this game gets more and more chaotic as it progresses. And the line between yourself and the game and physical space gets more and blurry. The windows shift around, ads pop up in real life as they do on your computer's machine. It just gets more and more intense and difficult to manage, which I guess is a recurring theme in my work. In addition to pop-ups that try to literally take over the user's machine, I also use a lot of browser defaults in work. This piece I made for the HTML review called Concrete Form is a good example of that, where it's very much influenced by Alexei Shulgin's form art, a lot of early net art pieces that just play with form elements and recompose them so that they look more poetic. They appear as visual elements and whatnot. So in this, you essentially move through this 100 form questionnaire, thinking a lot about bureaucracy and repetition and a lot of really dehumanizing immigration documents that I was filling out. And I just play with a lot of like the default form input, like attributes, placeholders, and whatnot, creating this piece that you fill in, which alters itself also based on your responses. But yeah, it plays with everything from file uploads to simple checkboxes to playing with things like text areas that you reveal and expand. Using the native style of elements in pieces like this, it makes me think about how I want to make work that naturally evolves, decays, and rots, that the work is ephemeral in form, looks different browser to browser, from machine to machine, and will eventually change as web standards do. I've also been drawn to websites, thinking about them inherently as acts of assembly and reassembly, and of course, websites that are drawn from other sites. And perhaps this reliance and linking to other sites and the decay that comes with that as part of it. These are some works I've made that play with iframes. I recently did this series of landscapes. Usually when I screen share this, it appears a lot laggy than it does in my computer, but this is just like a composition made of 42 YouTube embeds. So just a big fish tank. And I made a few other versions of this one for Syntax Mag, this magazine on internet culture. And when I presented it on the site itself, I also just include random pop-ups of the embeds used in the pieces themselves. And it's interesting because like some of these embeds are already broken. And I just made this piece at the end of 2023. But another thing that I'm drawn to about this kind of like YouTube collage iframe embed piece is that network speed is a part of it. When I think about how this looks for installations or on other people's machines, like network speed and the strength of your computer is such a huge part of it. This literally bricked my laptop in its like most dense form. So I had to cut it down from this initial 100 embed collage version. And because the iframes don't always load the same time whenever you launch it, and all these are looped differently, I've also like cut some videos and made timestamps jump at different times. The piece kind of feels generative, but is also not just dependent on algorithms that I've decided, but literally on the limitations of your machine and of your network. So it feels almost situated. Another iframe piece that I've been making is this iframe movie. It's eventually like I want to make this feature-length film entirely out of iframes. So it does a mix of going through GIFs, YouTube videos, Vimeo clips, just like direct image links. None of these are like sourced on my own server. So I link to a lot of like kind of ephemeral sites, and also depending on network speed, some of the sequences don't load immediately. It depends on if things are cached or not. And the only thing I control is the length of, or the duration of each iframe, the text that appears over it. I sometimes apply filters over the frame. So this part isn't loading at all anymore. Um, yeah, iframe movie. So it's been interesting to see the limitations of this piece. Literally, as I make this movie, I'm racing against like, I don't know how I'm going to be blocked from these sites, how all these links are going to die. A lot of my art pieces now, kind of in continuation of my practice of archiving the self, of having like these dense lists of personal sites, also have been playing with just like general themes of density. I am in awe of the internet back then, where you could just basically click and click and click and discover new things, and do random things all the time. Neopets is probably the best example of it. Um, this piece I've been working on for a while is a dating simulator that I haven't really fully released yet, but um, dating sims are such like a early flash game nostalgic concept for me, and I just wanted to make a browser-based version of it where you can date everything. And in this piece, I was just like, I just wanted to make a place where you could do everything. So I put kind of ridiculous detail into letting people borrow books from a library that just opens up PDFs. Um, there's random clicker games built in, where you can tend a flower field or something. Um, there's areas in this dating sim where you can just go on your laptop and open up a photo booth, which feels very meta. Um, and a lot of the mechanics here kind of feel like a lot of early interactive fiction stuff where you just like are told to write out the action that you want to perform, and you're shown the list of possibilities. And when I make sites that feel like places, I've been thinking about this project as a slow kind of like incremental piece. So I've usually been thinking about it in like fragments. Like I've been making a lot of like disparate games. You notice a lot of the projects I linked have like when we love at the beginning, and they're all kind of embedded in this larger piece, where eventually this is kind of like the mother game where you can discover all these like tiny aspects, where one of the games is a dream sequence. The form game is launched randomly when you go to work in this dating simulator game. Um, and working incrementally on these like little mini games that I build for like an hour or so, and then incorporate on this into this dating sim has been kind of like a fun exercise to um, make something huge from a lot of like small parts. Um, Another game that I've been working on that feels pretty tense is this piece called All I Love. When you open it, it's just this prompt that says All I Love slash thing. And essentially, I wanted to make use of the address bar here. In this game, you just type things and objects and eventually compose a world um, through these actions. It's kind of inspired by like a mix of falling sound games and like element combination games, that I saw a lot in the early internet, where you begin from typing things like moon, star, love, earth, a mix of concepts, places, and things, and they eventually play into each other. Um, so when you type a thing like door, um, it at times gives you actions like open, which doesn't work until you type in an object like key. Um, this website remembers those actions So you kind of have to find and type in combinations of different objects and places and things to unlock different aspects of this world. And underneath it is all this like apocalyptic narrative or something. Um, and something I like about this piece, aside from the fact that it's like composed of like hundreds of pages, is that um, I intentionally wanted to make it something that you have to play through the address bar. Um, so recurring suggestions or like the sites that you visited and have typed in the most are promoted to the top, which can affect the string and chains um, of objects and scenes that you compose. Another mechanic that I've been using a lot through my sites is local storage and just thinking about the active memory in pieces. As the websites are in itself very temporary artifacts. And I've been interested in making work that exposes that more. Um, this is a piece I made last year called Ang Bantayog, just Tagalog for the monument. And I made it as an anti-memorial, essentially. In this site, what you see is this infinitely scrolling page with about 11,000 candles. Each one represents one of the 11,103 documented victims from the Filipino martial law period. And essentially on the site, you can see candles that have their names. So you can visit it and light one each day, and it reveals a name from this roll. There are two versions of this site that I made, an individual experience and a whole one. You're on the whole one, so you can see this progress bar that shows how many have been lit. And the way that I keep record of which names have been remembered is done through like this text file on my server. So anyone who goes in the whole version kind of collectively goes through this active memory. But in the individual version, the storage of the piece is just done through your local storage. So if you visited it alone and light a candle each day, it would take 30 years for each candle to be lit. So thinking about the magnitude of loss paced with the decay of human and machine memory. And as the browser history is erased, history is literally erased here. The memory of any candles you lit are removed. So I cleared my browser cache here, which is why this is fresh. But this collective version of memory, even though it feels a bit more resilient than the other, is also pretty imperfect and impermanent. If something happens to my website host, or if someone, I don't know, exploits my text file, it's not very well written. It also erases collective memory, and the whole action has to be done again. In general, I'm thinking about how, as more of us dwell, commune, and live on the internet, we too have to confront the limitations of digital space. And as someone who puts so much of my life online here, thinking more and more about what preservation and maintenance means has been pretty important to me. Talking a bit about process, a lot of my work is written directly within a code editor, previewed on the browser next to it, really letting form inform the look and feel of the site. So programming and prose are written side by side. And a lot of my work, as you can see, tends to be hefty, textual, dense. There's no special script in making a lot of the work. I prefer to just handwrite everything. If you look at the brackets for all I love, you can just see this like immense list of objects and handwritten descriptions for each one. A piece I made lately is very much also about place and detachment. This is a single page game, but the entire code for it takes place in just like two JavaScript files, because the entire mechanics of this piece are that you have verbs as the actions, and then you click on objects and then unlock more verbs and see interactions through there. So if you look at the code, I just basically worked on this piece by thinking through all the objects, laying them out, and coming up with every possible like interaction that they could have with other verbs. So trying to self-contain them and work directly within the code editor as opposed to like working somewhere else and then moving it in here. All the writing and coding is done together. I'm in general interested in the constraints that working here directly affords my work, where it feels like data structures become equivalent to linguistic tools, or working with standards makes me think about how the work might end, how it might break gracefully against an internet that constantly brings this work to disappear, how arrays end and disperse affect my enjambment, the way I may keep process shift and change the site and reading. Conceptually, I've been thinking a lot about hypertext and interactive fiction movements as my heaviest inspirations. All of this way of being is intertextual. And I think about hypertext not just as a medium of electronic text per se, but more as a way of seeing, a way of engagement, a way of reading, a way of performance almost. I think about the way I stutter, lag, and pause as part of the work. I like the glitch and fragility of place. That's what it means to feel websites as human, not feels inhabited. A lot of my interest in internet ambience has also been manifesting through figuring out how to perform and read websites. I've been doing more desktop performances. I did screen walks lately where I've essentially like show my piece. I've been doing this in like physical and digital settings, trying to incorporate like network elements. And because all the pieces themselves are kind of like unique in every edition, it's been fun to really give them the space that they deserve in that each reading is new. Each way of encountering it is unique. Yeah, I'll end there for now. I can move on to questions about any specific projects or about my general practice. But yeah, in the end, I'm always thinking about what world a website can be, how to read it, how we can change people's idea of a site, and how thinking about websites also necessitates thinking about the environments that we position these sites in and the environment that we position these sites to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gia. Really amazing presentation, and we have some time for a couple of questions. Don't get opportunities like this all the time where we have Chia in the call ready to respond. So if anyone has a question, yeah, go ahead, Halim.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is amazing, mind-blowing. Thank you. I'm curious about, you mentioned internet and performance art, and this was a performance in so many ways. How is your work moving into the physical space, and how do you think about the physical space? Folks interacting with your work beyond the screen.
Yeah. My engagements with performance art are still very new, but I showed some snippets of these. It's basically been manifesting through a lot of offline performances I've been doing of the work. I've been incorporating a lot of networked elements in these pieces. Basically, I guess it's been influenced by how I miss when the internet was kind of like an activity that you did with people back when machines were bulkier and harder to access. And I've been watching how people like use my websites. It's very rare that I get the opportunity to do so. And because so much of this work is like obviously pretty enveloping and intrusive, I noticed how different people engage with them. So when I think about bringing these websites offline, it's not like I haven't been thinking about like changing them too much because inherently it's more like about bringing people together, noticing and giving weight and the place and the attention and reading that these sites deserve together. And at times also kind of recomposing some of the works I have to be better fit for like gathering. Like an example is that this is like a blurry clip of the forum poem piece that I shared earlier, where when I do like live readings of it, I've been sharing like a QR code or have been incorporating like forum questions and answers that other people have that the audience inputs into them. And I bring these like responses up at times through the reading, it disrupts it, etc. Um, Obviously, when I think about gathering online, it's important to think about what this gathering feels offline. And I think my biggest surprise and takeaway is that it's not necessarily anything different you need to do. It's already just magical to like look at a website as it is together um, and see how different people read it. There's not much translation necessary. It doesn't inherently need to feel more interactive or multiplayer. That active gathering already kind of changes your experience with it.
Thanks.
All right, I can hop in with a question, kind of building off of Halim's question, and we'll have Julie on deck. Because you mentioned you have some of your pieces you think of more as games, whereas others think more of as just like a website or an artwork. And this ties into performance too. Like how are you thinking about there being like a certain like right way to move through the piece, or like a way you want people to move through and interact with a piece rather versus have it being open-ended? Like typically in games, you'll have a lot of play testing to like make sure people are doing things as you've intended them. And I'm wondering how that works in your process, where you have a lot of these very open-ended websites that you can interact with a bunch of different ways. And how do you try and steer people to interact with a certain way versus leaving it open?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And finding the line between when a website becomes a game has been interesting. I think for me, I call a piece more of a game when it I have like I don't know, like when the agency that a user feels is a lot more inhibited. Um, I think of a website more as a net art piece if in its playing I'm working with I guess like the logic I know people to use the internet. I'm working with the constraints of the browser, just like embedding myself into how people already like think of a website. Whereas in games, like I think this game chat shop piece is a game. I think this piece that I kind of showed the glimpse of the code at, we're near the bedroom, is also more of a game because the agency that the user viewer feels is a lot more inhibited and constrained. And so I kind of gear them more towards like, I don't know, some goal or some objective or some narrative that they flow through. Whereas I treat a lot of my kind of more open-ended like pieces that still are like game-like this All I Love piece as I don't know, things that attempt to intrude on like the existing conditions and idea of agency that people already have as they like browse through things. So I think when I frame websites as like emergent experiences, the emergence or what is emergent is a lot more prefigured and set by me and predetermined in these game experiences, whereas the network pieces are like more about embedding and integrating into people's life and making experiences that they have to inhabit to really feel.
Great answer. We have a question here from Julie that is, what does your daily art practice look like?
Ooh, yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I think I'm kind of a weird case because I was like in middle school and I loved making websites. That was like my hobby. It was the only, I just like put everything in a website. So when I don't know, when I have free time, it's just literally my inclination to want to like condense something there. I will journal, I will think, I will process everything on a site, and maybe it manifests into a project. Most of the time it just manifests as like little sketches or like acts of maintenance on some site that I already have up. But I don't know, it's hard. I work a full-time job, and it takes up a lot of my creative energy, not just like physical energy. So it's been interesting to balance it, but also kind of helpful in a way. I try to think a lot about just like, I don't know, tooling and agency and the promise of the internet through my work, which is also about like providing infrastructure and expanding people's capacity. And then I just like default to making these like little art sites when I can. But I don't know. I have no studio. I didn't really like formalize my art practice until maybe last year, where I tried to enter into more like traditional art spaces and whatnot. So still a process of articulation for me and of carving out time.
Thank you. Yeah, Bonnie, go ahead.
Hi, Chia. Thank you so much for sharing. I really enjoyed it. I think as you were speaking, I was, because you were referencing so much about identity making and unmaking of identity and like ambience, and I think it was just the whole experience, and even just like your voice talking, like that. To me, it was just like that was like also ambience, like the performance itself, and yeah, and kind of like activating the pieces. So I guess I'm curious whether you would consider incorporating performance into like the making of like in that kind of self-referentialness into like making a net art piece, or whether you would kind of keep that separate and kind of yeah. And I'm also really curious because I feel like the experience of you talking about it and then seeing the pieces versus like me going to play the piece like myself will be really different.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think I don't know, inherently making anything on the internet is an act of performance. Um, it's it's difficult. I try not to think about any, I don't know, any notion of like earnesty or authenticity or worrying about what is real or what is not. Instead, I'm just interested in presenting my whole self. Um, and I think a lot of this comes right from like I began with making personal websites because I wanted to be seen, I wanted to be heard, I wanted to be visible, I wanted to make myself more important, and I thought a website was a way of legitimizing that. Um, when I think about putting work out now, sharing projects, etc., it felt natural to me that I should go out and perform them. I should like treat releases of websites, which people often take for granted, as I don't know, as grand as people treat like gallery openings, as grand as people treat album releases, etc. Even though a website is easier to publish and distribute, even if it's never finished, um, a lot of my work is about making them feel more important, giving them the sufficient space that they need to be seen, and to do that, it prerequisites a lot of like gathering of the self, of gathering people to witness a site together, of seeing how different people read the site, such that it can evolve. Yeah, I don't know. I used to just like self-publish a lot of work, like, and scatter it all over the internet. But now, if I really want to be, I don't know, I'm now interested in just like making everything a lot more extra. Uploading readings of sites as we do poetry readings, scoring websites. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question, but general thoughts on performance and process and publishing.
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
And looks like I think this is the last question we have time for, but let's yeah, go ahead, Jadel.
Yeah, thank you. This was amazing. You obviously spoke about like archiving the self and like a lot of the ways that you do that on these like websites that you develop or control in a certain way. Do you have thoughts on archiving yourself in or yeah, in existing websites or in like more spaces that are, you know, inhabited by other people as well? Are there things that draw you to certain communities? Are there things that you stray away from in that space? Or is it mostly like a more insular individual practice?
Yeah, I began with this, of course, it's like a pretty individual practice. I was, for a lot of my personal sites, I was like first thinking about, yeah, like myself, my life, my experiences, and this eventually kind of evolved into how I guess a lot of like what I tended to put on a website ended up becoming things like resources and tools, things that I built in community with others. So eventually that expanded to thinking about self-preservation as an act of communal preservation. And I didn't speak about it much in this like kind of presentation of work, but I also make a lot of kind of like explicit community archives. Of course, if I think about myself and recording myself online, I think about my interests. I think about the communities I find myself in. I think about the conditions of the web and how if it represses everything, if it um, constricts everything else, like what is the use of being online? So much of my work lately has also been about, I don't know, the Filipino internet space, how the internet has been this tool of extremism, has been used to disinform, has like destroyed our democracies, and how I can use these like individual commute and now community spaces to create records for people around me. I had that piece earlier about like local storage and memory, about the Filipino martial law regime. This is an index I made that was basically a way of kind of formalizing and representing a lot of like Google Drive um, archives that other people had put together. I have also been maintaining this organization called Develop PH since 2016, which has kind of evolved from like this weird tech startup-y thing when I was in high school and didn't know any better to something that thinks about how any history in the internet is the history of Filipino people. How can we better preserve and document this, especially when there's not a lot of institutional resources that go around to preserving Filipino culture offline and online. And if I live my life increasingly online, then it goes that preserving these spaces where I am, especially with other people, is more and more important. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
All right, so I'm on Barrel Silent Lizard. And again. So I'll again delete all of this. And one of the things I'll what I'll do is, let's say, so, welcome to my curiosity cabinet. See, would you like to take a peek in the cupboard? And maybe make this a link. We have a link, and we've done links before, linking out to an external website. But how do we link to our own internal website here? So how we do that is by making a new file over here. So remember from first day and from the Laurel Schwartz reading website, folder full of files. So we want to make a new page. We just make a new file. I'm going to go in here and plus, and now it's going to give me this little field where I can say add this file. And to add a new page, I need to add a new HTML file. So I'm going to call this cupboard.html. And I'm gonna let's do shelf 1, shelf 2, shelf 3. All right, not a lot on this website yet, but so we have this cupboard.html. Index.html is where we'll always go by default. But I've made cupboard.html. And if I want to link to cupboard.html off of index.html, I do href equals quotes, and I can just put in the name of the page. Cupboard.html. If you like to take a peek in the cupboard, and then here's shelf 1, shelf 2, shelf 3. And then if we want to go deeper in, could make a new shelf1.html. There, which one? There are many things on this shelf. And then I'm just gonna duplicate it a couple of times. Call this shelf2.html. Shelf3.html. Making new little files. Ooh, I think I messed something up in an illustrative fashion here. So I think this is a good time to talk about syntax highlighting as a thing that you may be like subliminally aware of. You'll just notice over here that shelf2 is .html is a different color than shelf 1 and shelf 3. It's like this grayish green color, whereas these are purple and all my other HTML files are purple. And that immediately is like triggering a warning bell for me that I have messed something up because these should have the same color. It means like, oh, this means somehow that glitch is not seeing this as an HTML file. Similarly, when I'm in shelf 1, we have these nice blue bold H1 tags here. Same with H3, but then in here, it just all looks like regular text. And how I'm going to address that is I'm going to go in and rename. And what's happened here, I don't know if you can see on my cursor, but there's an extra space at the end of .html. So I'm going to backspace and hit enter. And I think now it's fixed, although I don't know why it's still a different color. But now this highlighting in here is fixed. So that's a thing you want to be careful of in making websites. If you do a typo in the name of the site, it looks at, oh, what is the ending file extension of the file .html? Okay, I'll look at it as an HTML file. And so then we can hop back in the cupboard and I can do a href equals shelf1.html. And then kind of copy this down to shelf3. And then in here we could do including another ref equals covered. And then we can kind of have this nice little welcome my curiosity cabinet. Would you like to peek in the cupboard? Go to shelf 1. All right, we have a nice little loop here going across some of the different websites. So that's one way to have navigation. Another way to organize these things. You could also do or rummage in the bucket of things. And so we can make this bucket of things. And you can also have folders here on Glitch. It can help with organization. So I'm going to make add a file. And there's no way to just directly add a folder. You kind of add a folder by putting a slash in the username. So I'm going to say bucket slash index.html. So that created a folder called bucket and then a file inside of bucket called index.html. So remember from earlier on, index.html is always the page that's default opened inside of a folder. And that works with if you put a folder inside of your web page as well. So I have my bucket and then welcome to the bucket. I'm sorry, each of these internal pages are going to be very inconsequential as I'm mostly just trying to demonstrate some of the navigation. Let's go back to previewing. Oh yeah, I got to navigate too. So we have bucket. I have this bucket slash index.html here. And so if I want to link to that, I can do a href equals quotes. And there's a couple ways I can do this. I can just put in bucket. And it will by default look to the folder. So this is like whenever you see on a website, this page name slash this page slash this page. Yeah, let's look at like study slash sessions slash. So on the SFPC website, for example, whenever you see slashes, these are just folders inside of folders. So sfpc.study is the main site. Inside of that, there's a folder called sessions, which has a bunch of other folders. There's a folder called winter 24, which has a bunch of classes inside it. And then there's HTTPoetics inside of that. And then we get the index.html of HTTPoetics inside of here. Now, like, that's not technically true for a more complex CMS in that some of this might be loaded with server-side code, so it might not be an actual HTML file for each of these, but that conceptually, that's how you can envision it, is that there's just folders within folders, kind of just like on, if you would describe the file location of like, oh, where is my resume on my computer? It's this like document slash this slash this. Same way for websites. So we can do it like bucket. You can also just do slash bucket. Like the slash at the top will mean, oh, we're starting at the top of the website. But yeah, just do href equals bucket and it will look in here. And let's say, here, and then inside the bucket, there's a tiny wooden soldier. Href equals soldier.html. And so then we can we have tiny wooden soldier. So if I want to add a new, I can click these 3 dots by bucket and add a file to folder, bucket slash soldier.html. You got a splinter, ouch. Welcome to the bucket. There's a tiny wooden soldier. Oh no. So now it's looking for soldier.html. But it's not, it's looking at the top level rather than inside the folder. So if we want to actually connect it to this current page, there's a couple of ways to do that. We could do bucket slash soldier.html. Refresh this. So we can link like that. You can also do, I think, dot slash soldier.html. I think that will work. Nope. So we can do bucket, do yeah, slash bucket slash soldier. You can also just put a slash in front if you want. All right, bye, Julie. So, and these are some different ways of just moving around a page, and you could have, if you're trying to organize these different things, can drill down into different folders. You can also make a bunch of HTML pages. Those are up to you. So just checking my notes really quick here. And all right. Oh yeah, I'll also remind you, here, let me see, wooden toy soldier. Images. Copy image or copy image address. Pop this in here. Image source. And one thing we can also do is you can put a link around a href equals. You can put a link around an image. Now this a tag is wrapping around. Got to go to the bucket. Here's the soldier, and I can click on the soldier and go in this area. So you can make a. Bonnie asks, is it generally better to nest slash organize files inside of folders if you have a lot of pages? Yes, generally it is. It kind of depends on how you're organizing. I mean, like, honestly, I think for the context of this website, it depends how big. My feeling with it, yeah, is if you have 10 or fewer pages, it really doesn't matter. It does get to be useful. Folders tend to be really useful, especially if you're, which doesn't matter as much for since we're using glitch, but if you say like, if you have like a bunch of pages and each of those pages has a bunch of images and sound that you're also loading onto your server, and you have to like keep track of where all the and you're trying to find, oh, this sound file isn't working. Where is that sound file? Oh, it's probably in the folder of the page that's asking for it. Can do those. You can do those things, and there's yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it. But I think the most important thing is to like do what serves you. Don't worry about like best practices so much right now for organization. Just organize things in a way that makes sense to you and feels good to you, and that will be totally fine for the purpose of this class. Yeah, a couple other things I want to show. Just really quick. I'd like to encourage you, and many of you have been doing this already, but for those of you that haven't, go under settings, edit project details. I'm gonna change this to curiosity cabinet. Oh no. All right, I'm gonna call it curiosity cabinet website. Under settings, the like choosing the domain name or like the project name on Glitch. So this will be curiosity-cabinet-website.glitch.me. You can really see this in Chia's practice. Chia cares a lot about naming and puts a lot of care into the domain name of a website and that as an entrance into the site. So I really encourage you to use this title of the project as a creative space. There's often like kind of to our a question I think Liz brought up earlier, kind of like how much instruction do you give to the user on viewing your site? This is like the title, the URL is a really valuable space where you can give a context, you can give a title. Because I know it functions in a similar way in poems, where you can have a poem that is really inscrutable and difficult to read. And like if you think about some of these like these Douglas Kearney poems that we looked at last week, like this one, A Ship Crashes Down, where it's very much like a collage of different texts, but the title kind of gives you a way in. In a similar way for a piece for a website or a piece of net art, the website name kind of gives the viewer a way in to the title of the piece. I can also show here, Chia uses this a lot. You can use a title tag. Main cabinet, or we could say title outside the cabinet. And now we can see that becomes the title of the tab. So that's like, these are like little features that can kind of orient people. This is a way, a lot of what you were talking about for working on your projects last week is like, it's interesting, like your web page is kind of like this weird hybrid life form in combination with the web browser. It's a parasite or a symbiotic organism kind of living on the browser. And these are some ways you have of influencing different things the browser does. Whereas typically you can think of the web page like basically usually only gets to control the stuff below this top bar, but the title is a tag where we get to control something up here. In future classes, I'll show you how to like dynamically change it and animate it in the way that that Gia does. But even right now, like you can, that's like an interesting spot for text to put on these different pages as you're laying things out. Also, just a little form of navigation. We can take a peek into the bucket with our friend the iframe. Iframe source equals bucket width equals 600, height equals 400. So so this is our other website. And now we're navigating inside of here. If we want to be really meta, we can have source equals slash. This is a compelling way to make an infinite website. So Camille asks, can you create an iframe by just dropping in any site, or does the site have to allow you to re-embed? The site has to allow you, and that's primarily for like phishing and security reasons. Like for if you imagine like there's different websites where it's like, oh, sign in using Google, and if someone had a sign in using Google button and they like opened Google in an iframe, but then made it so that they had their own field that captured your password rather than being on top of Google. There's lots of security reasons why sites might want to block iframes, which definitely ruins some of our fun. But definitely by default, like your own websites, you'll be able to open with iframes, and typically you'll have much more success opening a website that doesn't have like a login system. Like I'm pretty sure I can just like hop right into my favorite website, tacobell.com. And oh, no, Taco Bell won't let me in. Betrayed by my fave. Yeah. A lot of corporate websites don't want you to display them out of context, and so don't let you iframe, but more personal websites often will let you. And you can also use it to great effect of just iframing your own websites. So as we're experimenting with navigation, yeah, we don't get the full layers within layers, but you can drop an iframe as a form of navigation as well. Let me see if there's any other things. But yeah, like I guess like another more experimental form. Maybe I want to get to soldier.html, and we'll just change this back to source equals bucket, or source equals bucket here. And maybe I'll make a div, give it style equals position fixed background, or position fixed, with top 0 pixels, right 0 pixels, width 100 px, height 100 px. And have this be a href equals bucket. So I've got this div here. And we can't see it, but if I move my cursor to the upper right, I've just got this little transparent space that's now a link. So sometimes you can also just do, if I want, or maybe I want this to be width 1,000. And now I can have basically this whole area, or wait, I meant to do height 1,000, width 100, height 1,000. So I can have this whole area on the side of the page is now a link. And so you can kind of like organize spatial links, and you can blend together some of the things that we were working with last week by having your navigation be expressive in that way. I don't think I have quite enough time to fully implement, although, let's see if I could. There's personally, I have a hard time doing it live because I don't have as much experience with it. But there's a tag called map and area, which allow you to, in particular, this can be useful for websites like with a map or where you want to layer links on top of a, oh yeah. So Ali says you're trying to put a YouTube video and have it autoplay, but it's basically impossible now. Yeah. Autoplay is really difficult. I think partially there's some reasons for YouTube, but it's also in general, it's harder to autoplay any kind of media on website, even if it's your own audio or video, because browsers changed how they handle media basically because too many advertisements autoplayed sound and video, and it was too hard to stop it. And so browsers are like, okay, like if all these advertisements are going to be autoplaying audio and video, we have to just stop them, make it so no one can autoplay audio and video. And so now typically you have to set up a thing where you click in the page or do some sort of user action before that kind of thing could happen. And yeah, I think like a recurring theme in this class will be like the internet is like a platform for advertisers that we get to hang out in. It's like we're hanging out in the abandoned part of the mall doing our thing. But there's a lot of like features and a lot of the defaults, especially these days, are designed around advertising working. That is, I guess, also a cultural shift though. In the early days, it was much more designed around personal websites. But let's see if I can, basically some of the things you can do in here. So you can have a map and area. I'm gonna copy in some of these examples and see if I can get it to fit on our little soldier in the bucket. All right, so we've got to give it use map equals hashtag word map, and then we have a map in here. We'll call this soldier. And to actually do a good one of these, you'd probably want to like open it in Photoshop and find the exact pixels. I don't know, Kayla, it sounds like you maybe have used image maps more than I have, and maybe you have some support tooling. But let's say, so we have these coordinates where you basically give it the center of the circle. And so let's do 200, 244, and then this will link to this will link back to the home page. And then got to get rid of this. Bucket of things. Where is 200, 200? Ooh. All right, I think we want to give this one a width. So style equals width 200 pix, height 500 pix. And then we can give this 100, 144. All right, and so now we have this hidden little area that links to another website. Basically what that's doing is creating a little invisible circle at 100, like 100 pixels from the left, 100 pixels from the top, 44 pixels diameter radius. Again, it's a little fiddly. It's a similar vein to working last week in that kind of the browser wasn't designed for pixel level image manipulation, and so in some ways you're working against some of the design constraints, but there can also be a lot of fun and creative stuff that comes out of that. So if this is a thing you want to dive into, you definitely can. I often find it easier to just like overlay a link on top of an image or like put a transparent div somewhere, but this is another fun way to do it. Okay, I think I am pretty much out of time. Yeah, just I'll pause for any questions right here on some of these forms of navigation and making multiple pages and moving through them. Okay, people are heading out. One last thing before you go. So I don't have any reading this week, but what I'm asking you to do is I have these three websites. I have jody.org. I have a website called Mouchette. These are both kind of like famous older school kind of net art pages that are kind of big and sprawling and you can get lost in. And I have one of Chia's pages. We are only moving always moving towards each other. And I'm just asking you to spend 5 minutes each browsing each of these pages and just like don't try and see everything on the page because they're going to be much bigger than you can find. And also, I feel like it's sort of against the spirit to try and see everything. I think these are web pages you can return to again and again and just like take a different path through each time and find something new and surprising. But these are some of the inspirations for thinking about this sort of non-traditional navigation on a page. And so I want you to spend some time with that and then come back ready to share some of your experiences on these different sites. I have a couple other ones to check out here if you have some more time. Some Twine games, a website you may have heard of called wikipedia.org. You can also try clicking through there, just spend some time. Another web page famous for its ability for you to get lost on it and find deep hidden corners. Yeah. So some things to check out there, some links to what I talked about in class today. And yeah, looking forward to seeing your multi-page websites, your online places next week.